Well, Senator Cruz, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
It's great to be with you. Welcome.
We're here to talk about the very long year that it's already been in Washington, from border security to aid for our allies. Since we're here in Houston, I want to start close to home, though. It was just a week ago, last Sunday, that a woman walked into Lakewood Church and attempted to murder worshipers. This is just the latest example of a fear that we all, Republicans and Democrats, have now about whether we're going to be safe in our places of worship or wherever we are in public. What more do we need to do as a state to protect people from those who wish to do us harm?
Well, we need to do a lot more. What happened at Lakewood Church is horrific. Where you and I are sitting right now is just a couple of miles from Lakewood Church. You have an individual, a transgender individual, who was a left-wing activist, who brought in a rifle that had Free Palestine written on the rifle. Apparently had some very significant sympathies, if not more, for Hamas. And I will say, for a long time, I've been saying the risks we are facing of Hamas terrorists and of Hezbollah terrorists coming to this country are growing every day, and they're growing in significant part because of Joe Biden's open borders. The exposure we have, I think unfortunately we're going to see more serious terrorist attacks unfold in the months ahead, because if you go down to the southern border, the Border Patrol agents are actively looking for Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists, and Hamas has called for acts of terrorism against the United States.
Well, Senator, I just want to make sure we're clear about this specific instance. We're not clear yet whether this was a transgender shooter. We know that she was a biological female who brought her biological son. She appeared to present as female. Here's what we do know about her. She was arrested 6 times prior, including for charges involving unlawful carrying of a weapon, of assaulting a peace officer. She had been reported to the FBI and Child Protective Services and had a documented history of mental illness. Your opponents have made a large part of their campaign about red flag laws, gun reform. Should this shooter have been able to purchase the AR-15 she did in December?
Well, we don't know the facts about this shooter yet. As I said, we know that he or she was a pro-Hamas activist based on what was written on the gun.
We know it said Palestine on the gun.
Okay, and the people, everyone who says Free Palestine and brings in a gun and shoots people, they're pro-Hamas activists.
It said Palestine. But
terrorists who are murdering people in the names of Palestine, 100% of them are pro-Hamas, unless they're pro-Hezbollah. You're sitting here arguing there's a non-Hamas.
No, I'm not arguing.
Terrorist
I just want to make sure
position.
that the facts about this case are clear.
The facts jump off the page. And let me say more fundamentally, when it comes to violent crime, I've spent 20 years fighting violent crime. We have seen violent criminals target individuals far too often. We've seen it far too often in Texas. And I have led the way consistently in the Senate. The way to stop violent crime is to go after the criminals, to go after the murderers, to go after the felons, the fugitives, those with serious mental illnesses, to put them in jail, to get them off the streets, to stop them from buying guns illegally. And what is infuriating is every time the Democrats in Washington, their position, when I introduce legislation, for example, to put more money to fund security at houses of worship, because we've seen a pattern of lunatics going to houses of worship and trying to commit mass murder, the Democrats block that funding. When I introduced funding to put more security in schools, the Democrats block that funding. When I introduced that legislation to mandate that the Department of Justice lock up felons and fugitives who try to illegally buy firearms, the Democrats block that funding. And the reason, it's bizarre. When they look at this issue, the only thing apparently they want to do is take away the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. They want to take away your right to defend your family and your home. But when you focus on going after the bad guys, the Democrats consistently in Washington block legislation to do that. And I have been fighting that for 12 years to go after the criminals, get them off the streets, and keep our families safe.
And respectfully, you know, we could talk about this topic all day. I want to get to a lot more, but in this case, she was not a law-abiding citizen. She had a long documented history, not only of criminal activity, but mental illness.
Yeah.
Do you think that, here's the question, is this an example of a case that could have been stopped sooner?
It could well be, and we'll find out more about her facts, although I will say the narrative is such that the media doesn't seem all that interested in talking about her facts. But Let me give you an example of a case that we do now know the facts of, and this is a case from a few years ago, the Sutherland Springs shooting. Sutherland Springs was a church just outside of San Antonio. It's the worst church shooting in U.S. history. I was there the day after it happened. It was horrific. If you look at what happened in Sutherland Springs could have and should have been prevented. I introduced my very first year in the Senate legislation. It was called Cruz, and it was comprehensive legislation to stop gun crime. What did Cruz do? It mandated that the Department of Justice conduct an audit of all the federal databases to make sure felony convictions are reported to the databases. The shooter in Sutherland Springs should have been ineligible to buy a gun. Why? Because that shooter had a felony conviction, had serious mental illness. Now, what happened? The Obama Air Force failed to report that conviction to the database. So when the shooter went in to buy the gun, they ran a background check, and the background check came up clean because the felony had never been reported to the database. Cruz, which I authored, would have mandated an audit to make sure that that conviction is in the database. But number two, even more importantly, Cruz mandated that when a felon tries to illegally buy a gun, that DOJ prosecute them and put them in jail. Sadly, the Biden administration has a pattern. When felons try to illegally buy guns, they don't prosecute them. They don't put them in jail. And if Cruz had passed, we took a vote on it in the Senate floor. It got 52 votes on the Senate floor. It got a bipartisan majority. 9 Democrats voted for it. It was the most bipartisan of any of the comprehensive legislation. But it didn't pass because the Democrats in the Senate filibustered it. They demanded 60 votes. Right. And I look at that moment, if Cruz had passed, there's a very real possibility that Sutherland Springs shooter would never have happened because he would have been in jail instead of in that beautiful church. So we need to do much more. But the pattern, sadly, in Washington is that Democrats play politics with this issue.
And you've previously said red flag laws should be left up to the states.
Sure.
You think Texas is one of those states?
I trust the state legislature to make appropriate determinations. And listen, it's worth noting, I've got a record on this. So the state of Texas has a law. It's called the Sexually Violent Predator Civil Commitment Law. That's a law that when you have someone that is a sexual predator, you can go and get a determination in court that they're a sexually violent predator, and you can civilly commit them. You can lock them up. What happened is a Texas Court of Appeals down in Corpus Christi struck that law down. They concluded it was unconstitutional. I was the Solicitor General of Texas at the time. I argued the appeal in front of the Texas Supreme Court. I argued it myself, and I won 9-0, reinstating the law to take people who've been adjudicated as sexually violent predators and get them off the streets. I think when it comes to murderers and rapists, one of the problems with today's Democrat Party is they back, number one, efforts to defund the police, but number two, they back George Soros DAs that let violent criminals go. I think violent criminals should be in jail and not terrorizing innocent citizens.
I appreciate you having that prolonged discussion there. I want to get to the border, though, of course. Yep. After a few trials and errors in Washington, still no progress towards what every Republican agrees is the top priority, better securing the border. Is this something that we need to get done before this election? And how do you think the politics of the election year are influencing the debate in Washington?
What is happening at our southern border is an utter catastrophe. It is a crisis. I spend a lot of time at the border. I go down to the border over and over and over again. I bring a lot of my colleagues down. I bring a lot of other senators down because I think until you see it with your own eyes, you can't really understand. I promise you, folks listening at home, if you haven't gone and seen it, as bad as you think it is worse. When I bring senators down to the border, I'll go with Border Patrol. We'll go out on midnight patrol. And when you go out on midnight patrol, you don't actually look for illegal aliens. They look for you. Within minutes of being out on patrol, you will have groups of illegal aliens come up to you and they will turn themselves in. They affirmatively turn themselves in to the Border Patrol. Why is that? Because when they do so, the Biden administration will send them to whatever city they want to go. They know that once they turn themselves in, Joe Biden has put in place catch and release, which means they get to stay here. And you know, it really is striking when you go down to the border. This policy today is indefensible. The human suffering that is happening because of the chaos at our open border It is qualitatively different than it has ever been in the history of our country. We have had 9.6 million illegal immigrants come in under Joe Biden, and that is a deliberate decision. Joe Biden and the Democrats want this to happen, and they intend for it to continue to happen and to accelerate in the years ahead. And they apparently are not at all concerned about the people who are dying, about the people who are being abused, about the people who are suffering because of their open borders.
You know, I've been on those patrols with Border Patrol as well, and it is harrowing. It is a crisis just to see how they are inundated and trying to help as best they can. But one of the things that they stress is that we need to stem the flow of migrants. They're simply overwhelmed, and they need more resources. The bill that just failed in Congress, you voted against.
I did.
Would have provided a mechanism to turn off that flow at certain levels. It would have provided more resources to Border Patrol. Why was that not the answer?
The bill that the Democrats drafted was a terrible bill. This bill, number one, would not have fixed the problem, but number two, it would have even made it worse. So understand, the Democrats do not want to secure the border, so they were not willing to agree to anything that actually would secure the border. Here's what this bill would do. It would codify, it would put into law Joe Biden's open borders. It would codify catch and release. Right now, when the Biden administration releases illegal immigrants they're apprehending, they're violating the law. This bill would have said, nope, perfectly okay to let them go. Not only that, it codifies catch and release. It provides immediate work permits to the illegal aliens that are being released. It provides lawyers paid for by the taxpayers. Not only that, it normalizes 1.8 million illegal immigrants a year. Over the last 3+ years of Joe Biden, we've had 9.6 million illegal immigrants. Under this bill, you would have had normalized about 6 million, but it's actually more than 6 million. When it hits the 1.8 million cap, and in a provision they claimed shut down the border, except it only operated 270 days a year, and by the third year it operated 180 days a year, which means you'd get 6 million illegal immigrants with the stamp of approval of the federal government. What the Democrats wanted was 2 million illegal immigrants every year in perpetuity. That is lawlessness. That is literally putting into law the invasion that is happening in Texas. This was a terrible bill.
This is one thing that you've argued consistently, which is that the Biden administration and their handling of the border is not a result of incompetence or policy failure. You say it is deliberate.
That's exactly right.
On what evidence do you make the argument that President Biden wants this to happen? Because he is saying that he wants to solve this just as much as anybody, and he says you need to give him a bill to do it.
Well, except the facts are to the contrary. Let's review the facts. When Joe Biden became president, he inherited the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. Working hand in hand with President Trump, we had made enormous progress securing the border. It was working. All Joe Biden had to do was nothing. He literally had to just don't screw it up. And instead he did the opposite. His first week in office, understand this is deliberate, his first week in office he made 3 decisions. He immediately halted funding of the border wall, shut it down on day one. Number 2, he reinstated catch and release, the policy that when someone's apprehended, they get let go. And number 3, the most damaging, he pulled out of the Remain in Mexico agreement, which had produced tremendous results. It's why we had the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. And what were the results? Literally overnight, we went from the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years to the worst in history. Those were 3 unilateral decisions. And Ryan, what that means, Joe Biden could solve this problem tomorrow on his own. He didn't take any legislation to do that. He did it because he decided to defy the law. If he wanted to fix the problem tomorrow, what would he do? He'd reverse those 3 decisions. He'd build the wall, he'd end catch and release, and he'd reinstate Remain in Mexico. He won't do it because the Democrats see these 10 million illegal immigrants as future Democrat voters, and they're willing to overlook human suffering because they want what they see as political advantage.
That is a common argument. These people coming over cannot vote. They're not citizens, right?
Really?
Really?
And your position is there are no illegal immigrants who vote illegally in this country?
I would I wouldn't resort to extremes, but I know
You
that
just said they can't vote.
across the board,
Can they vote in DC?
there are
Can they
hardly
vote in
any
DC?
people who are voting illegally.
Can they vote in D.C.? Because the District of Columbia has legalized illegal aliens voting in D.C. They've passed legislation that illegal aliens can vote in D.C. New York has done the same thing. Now, ostensibly, illegal aliens are supposed to vote in local elections, but not in federal elections. That's the claim. But you need to understand what the Democrats are doing. They're looking at this.
So you see this as a long-term
It's both
plot
short.
that is deliberate. Back to my question.
Let me tell a story. So one of the last times I was down at the border, a reporter asked me, said, aren't the policies of the Democrats on illegal immigration, aren't they much more humane? Aren't they much more compassionate? And I actually started laughing.
Right.
And I turned to the reporter, I said, you know who doesn't believe that anymore? The Democrats. And I just asked the reporter, I said,
how so?
Where's Joe Biden? Where's Kamala Harris? Where's a single Democrat senator? Where's a single Democrat House member? Why is Colin Allred not doing campaign events down at the border as illegal immigrants stream across the border? Because you cannot see what is happening and defend it. When Alejandro Mayorkas testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I asked him, I said, last year, how many migrants died crossing illegally into this country? He said, I have no idea. The answer is 853. I'll tell you, Ryan, when you sit down with Texas farmers and ranchers and you see the pictures of the dead bodies they find every single day on their property, of elderly people and pregnant women and children left to die, you're sickened to your stomach. When you look in the eyes of kids who have been brutalized, horribly physically and sexually assaulted by human traffickers every day, when you look in the eyes of women who have been repeatedly raped by human traffickers, when you look at the 10,000 people who died of drug overdoses, nobody can watch the chaos at our southern border and defend it, which is why the Democrats' strategy is pretend it doesn't exist. They don't go down there. They hope the TV cameras don't go down there, because there is no explanation for this other than misery, and it is misery Joe Biden and the Democrats could stop tomorrow.
I think their position is just that they would like to solve this. They just don't believe they can without more legislative power.
But so, that's objectively false, because they caused it with no changes in legislation. It is a fact that when Joe Biden came into office, we had the lowest rate in 45 years. It is a fact that he made 3 unilateral decisions and created this crisis. It took no legislation. And it is a fact that tomorrow he could reverse those 3 decisions, and the result would be the numbers would plummet. All of that he has the ability to do right now today. He does not want to, and let me be clear, Colin Allred and the Democrats don't want him to either. They are fully on board with this open border agenda, with this invasion of our state, and they're willing to look the other way. You know, Alejandro Mayorkas, when he testified before judiciary, he said he cared about all the children being brutalized, all the women being raped. And I said, with all due respect, you do not care. Because if you cared, you would do something about it. His policies, Joe Biden's policies, Colin Allred's policies, are causing these deaths, are causing these assaults, and they could stop it. And they choose not to stop it because cynically, they're putting their own partisan political gain over protecting the lives of the people who are being brutalized every day. And I'll tell you something else. Do you know who has really, really suffered as a result of Biden's open borders? The people of Mexico. And I'll tell you why. In 2018, these are numbers from the New York Times. Do you know how much the drug cartels made from human trafficking in 2018?
Billions.
Roughly 500 million. It actually was not that profitable in 2018. You know how much they made last year? $13 billion. The drug cartels, the profits, the revenue from human trafficking has increased 2,600%. That is because of Joe Biden and Colin Allred's open borders. And the people of Mexico right now, they have taken vicious, murdering drug kingpins and they've made them massive multi-billion-dollar empires. And in Mexico, you see people being murdered, being kidnapped, being tortured. The people of Mexico, Mexico is a wonderful nation that is being destroyed because the Democrats' policies are making the most powerful and dangerous entity in the entire country, these drug lords that are terrorizing the people of Mexico.
You gotta wrap, Ryan.
Let's just wrap on this. You mentioned your opponent, Colin Allred. I believe we're also speaking with Senator Gutierrez for this program as well. So just to wrap quickly, taking a bird's eye view here, you're up for re-election for your third term. You've been in office for 12 years. What is your pitch to the average Texas voter who looks back at the last 12 years in Texas and is wondering, how is my life better?
Well, listen, what we're doing in Texas works. If you look at Texas for more than a decade, we've had over 1,000 people a day coming to the state of Texas, moving to the state of Texas. Why? Because Texas is where the jobs are. My priorities are jobs, freedom, and security. Every day I'm fighting for more jobs for Texans, for higher wages, for better opportunity. I'm fighting for freedom to protect your constitutional rights, and I'm fighting for security to keep your family safe, whether it is from criminals on the streets or whether it is from illegal aliens crossing in a massive invasion, to keep your family safe. And I'll tell you, that's a common sense agenda that Texans support. That also means abundant jobs means abundant energy. And one of the things we've seen Joe Biden and Colin Allred and the Democrats do is wage a war on energy in the state of Texas, attacking energy in the state of Texas, which is hurting millions of Texans. It doesn't make sense. Look, if you think back not too long ago, the state of California was a very different place than it used to be. California was an economic powerhouse. People wanted to come to California. California was creating jobs. By the way, California was the heart of the Republican Party. You look back to the days of Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon, California was bright red. And tragically, what we saw in California is when left-wing Democrats got put in charge, they have done enormous damage to that beautiful state. I don't want to see the same thing happen here. I want to keep Texas, Texas. And I think that's what this election's about. If you want to have the policies that are working here in Texas, low taxes, reasonable regulations, lots of jobs, your family safe and secure, and your constitutional rights protected, every day that's what I fought to do, and every day that's what I'll continue doing.
Senator, you keep me on my toes. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.